You know, it must be tough to be an authoritarian. You promise everybody in the world to get elected. Prices will go down on day one. No more inflation. We're going to end Russia's war on Ukraine. The world's going to respect us. And then you get in, and even though you inherit an economy from your predecessor that's described as the envy of the world by The Economist magazine, you crash everything.
Mr. Speaker, I found the preamble to this big, ugly bill. We, the billionaires, and our king, in order to deform and sicken our union, establish injustice, ensure domestic servility, weaken our people's defenses, undermine the general welfare, and reserve to ourselves and our posterity staggering debt servitude for eternity, do hereby instruct the Republicans in Congress to strip 17 million people of their health care, increase co-pays, deductibles, and premiums for everyone else, cut 42 million people off of nutritional assistance, increase the national debt by $4 trillion, trash renewable energy systems, increase our electric bills for the carbon kings, all to weaken and destroy the Constitution of the people of these United States of America. Please include this preamble in the legislative record. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlewoman from North Carolina.
Sometimes our colleagues will say, we have three co-equal branches. Really? First of all, co-equal is not even a word, okay? Secondly, if we're co-equal, why is it that Congress has the power to impeach, try, and convict a president and remove a president, but the president doesn't have the power to impeach, try, convict, and remove us?
Pointing fingers is for losers. I'm quoting our colleague, Representative Chip Roy, from last week. And this has become a mantra for our colleagues in the wake of the devastating flooding in Texas, which cost already 132 lives with still 160 people missing. It's now an article of faith among our colleagues that in the age of climate change disasters like Hurricane Helene, which cost 200 lives in North Carolina, or deadly tornadoes in the Midwest, you name it, in the age of out-of-control gun violence, whether in Uvalde or Buffalo or Charleston or Parkland, we should never engage in finger-pointing or casting blame or attributing responsibility to individuals. Although, of course, Donald Trump finger points and casts blame at Democratic leaders, as he did recently with Governor Newsom with the wildfires in California. But in any event, the point is, we don't really want to know which individuals are responsible. We should be addressing the underlying systemic problems like climate change, effective emergency response and planning, or mass gun violence and reducing access to military-style assault weapons, rather than vilifying people and casting blame on a partisan basis. Fine, let's adopt that rule. Finger pointing is for losers. For this committee, no to finger pointing, yes to problem solving. But this entire hearing is nothing but absurd political finger-pointing. And it's not even finger-pointing at people who actually run our government or occupy public office. It's finger-pointing at not-for-profit groups like Church World Service or HIAS, Lutheran Community Services, and the reviled philanthropist George Soros, who has given away hundreds of millions of dollars to make the world a better place. I don't like everything that every right-wing, not-for-profit group does in America or around the world, but I don't think it merits a full-blown congressional hearing. We didn't even have a hearing on the richest billionaire in the world, Elon Musk, who actually had a government job running Doge, destroying large parts of our government, firing tens of thousands of our federal workers. The Republicans didn't even call in Elon Musk for a hearing or have a hearing about what he was doing, but they want to have a hearing in 2025 about George Soros, all of the old, tired, exhausted, absurd conspiracy theories again. And I don't see any, and these witnesses can correct me if I'm wrong, I perused all their statements. I didn't see a single one of them allege a single crime, anything illegal going on. They just don't like the things that he invests in. They don't like what certain not-for-profit groups do. Well, I don't love everything that the right-wing not-for-profits do. Why are we having a hearing about this? What an absurd waste of time.
The American people across the political spectrum are now demanding the release of the complete Epstein file. This is what President Trump and Vice President Vance and the whole Trump team was demanding up until the last couple weeks when President Trump suddenly decided he wanted to sweep the whole thing under the rug. So there are now two approaches in Congress. We've got a bipartisan binding law which has teeth to compel disclosure of all the relevant material that America wants to see. But on the other hand, the Republicans in the Rules Committee just unveiled a meaningless, hortatory, fig leaf, Swiss cheese resolution that has no teeth at all. It doesn't even have dentures. It's all cavities, what they've offered. So we've got a choice now. We can go with a bill that would actually have teeth for enforcement, or a meaningless hortatory resolution that has all the legal force of National Chrysanthemum Month. Now, the original Massey bill asks for a comprehensive release from the Attorney General. And it's binding, which means if they don't turn it over, we can go to court. It's comprehensive, includes everything from flight logs and travel records to individuals, including government officials, named or referenced in connection with all of Epstein's criminal activities, all of the entities involved. We want to know about all the immunity deals. And it even tries to deter and account for destruction, deletion, alteration, misplacement, or concealment of documents and records. All of that falls out of this fraudulent resolution they've thrown up at the last minute here. There's nothing in there except for a series of qualifying weasel words which are added to give complete unilateral subjective discretion to the Attorney General. Can I have 30 seconds more? To give complete discretion to the Attorney General to decide what should be in and what should be out. So it starts off by saying, whereas our resolution says all documents, records, and communications, theirs says all credible documents, records, and communications. Well, who's going to decide that? Attorney General Bondi, in conjunction with Donald Trump, who today said that a letter that he wrote to Jeffrey Epstein on his birthday, which is published, which says all of the indicia of credibility is not credible. That wouldn't be included. Let's release the real Epstein file.
This week's events show how MAGA has turned American justice completely upside down and inside out. Over the last week, we've been talking about a single rogue DOJ employee who unilaterally canceled more than $500 million in Department of Justice grants to local law enforcement and victims' rights organizations and those assisting the victims of rape and sexual assault across the country. That's what right-wing policies do. I would say to my friend, the chair of the full committee, we tried to restore that money. Nobody seemed to know how any of this happened, but our colleagues didn't utter a word against our amendment, and yet they all voted against it. What else happened? Well, a 33-year-old January 6 rioter who assaulted our police officers at the Capitol, and he smashed the glass pane through which Ashley Babbitt climbed before she was fatally shot by a Capitol officer, was arrested again yesterday. This time they got him for burglarizing neighbors' homes. This was a guy who was pardoned by President Trump, now robbing houses in Virginia. This Zachary Alam was serving an 8-year sentence after a jury convicted him of 7 criminal felonies and 3 misdemeanors when President Trump granted him clemency as part of the mass pardon of 1,600 insurrectionists and rioters for the thousands of crimes committed on that day. At sentencing, U.S. District Court Judge Friedrich described the testimony of police who recalled Alam as, quote, by far the loudest, most combative, and most violent of the January 6 rioters who attacked the police in the part of the Capitol that these officers were defending. And yesterday, the Trump Department of Justice agreed to pay nearly $5 million to the family of Ashley Babbitt, the rioter who tried to storm the House Speaker's lobby on January 6 after she broke into the Capitol and after the aforementioned Mr. Alam broke that window. The Department of Justice originally took the position that her wrongful death lawsuit brought by her family was wholly without merit, no basis, and that Babbitt's civil rights had never been violated by the police, and that the police officer acted reasonably in defense of members of Congress and in defense of Vice President Pence. A Capitol Police investigation cleared the officer involved, saying his actions at the height of the riot, quote, potentially saved members and staff from serious injury and possible death from a large crowd of rioters who had forced their way into the Capitol, into the House chamber, where members and staff were steps away. In 2023, then House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said, I think the police officer did his job. Now, although Trump's new attorney general is set to give $5 million to the rioters' family, Trump has not proposed to give a penny to the more than 140 police officers injured, wounded, hospitalized, disfigured, and or disabled in their violence, and nothing to their families. He's proposed no money payments to the bereaved family of Officer Brian Sicknick, an Army veteran with 2 tours abroad who died at age 42 here on January 7th, 2021, the very next day after being brutalized by rioters. The decision to give millions of dollars to the Babbitt family and nothing to the families of the police officers who defended this Capitol, who defended us, exacerbates the insult of Speaker Johnson's continuing refusal to hang a simple plaque in honor of the officers who defended the Capitol and the Congress and the Vice President. A plaque mandated by law and now more than 2 years overdue on the West Front of the Capitol. The Speaker's stubborn refusal to respect the law is craven submission to the executive branch, to Donald Trump, who wants to pretend that the rampaging mob that he sent to Congress was made up of patriotic heroes and that the people he pardoned were, quote, hostages and, quote, political prisoners. A hostage is someone who's been illegally abducted by a terrorist group like Hamas and held for a financial or political ransom. A political prisoner is someone like Alexei Navalny or Nelson Mandela, who's been imprisoned for ideological reasons, not for violently assaulting the police or engaging in seditious conspiracy or destroying federal property. But the administration's effort to create big news yesterday was Trump's acting U.S. attorney in New Jersey, a blatantly partisan prosecutor who has bragged about working to turn New Jersey red. Well, she announced her intention to indict our colleague, Congresswoman LaMonica McIver, on charges of assaulting, resisting, and obstructing law enforcement based on the now famous May 9th incident outside of Delaney Hall, an ICE detention facility in McIver's district, where she was conducting a scheduled oversight visit with other members of Congress, including our 80-year-old colleague, Bonnie Watson-Coleman, and the mayor of Newark. Well, Delaney Hall is operated by the private prison company GEO, a major Republican donor that gave $1 million to Make America Great Again, Inc., and has faced numerous lawsuits for its treatment of detainees and unsafe conditions. The members had a lawful right to be there and to investigate, and even after ICE initiated a scuffle to arrest the mayor of Newark on public property, the House members were let in to tour the facility to conduct nonviolent oversight, and the tour went smoothly. This indictment is a manifest fraud, clearly designed to distract America this week from the administration's savage and unpopular effort to strip 14 million Americans of their Medicaid and health coverage and 11 million Americans of Head Start, Meals on Wheels, and other nutritional assistance programs like SNAP. Representative McIver was, of course, executing one of the core duties of a member of Congress, oversight, pursuant to her precise statutory right to enter and visit an ICE facility. The Supreme Court has repeatedly held that oversight is a central element of the legislative process, because if we can't research the facts on the ground, we don't know what laws to pass. This, for the Department of Justice to charge McIver with assault, is an outrage against the Constitution, which protects members of Congress from civil and criminal prosecution for performance of their core legislative duties. It is also a scandal in light of the DOJ's constant backing of cop-beating insurrectionists, including with the shocking policy that these pardons can even apply to criminal charges wholly unrelated to the events of January 6th, as well as the DOJ's jaw-dropping decision to fire more than a dozen senior criminal prosecutors simply because they had worked on the January 6th case. Yet now we've got colleagues who celebrate January 6th insurrectionists actually calling for prosecution of members of the House for doing their jobs. Representative Buddy Carter called our colleagues rioters. Representative Bishop actually said this was an insurrection. I didn't know that was in his vocabulary, but this was an insurrection, and he said it was a debacle worse than 9/11. No police officers or ICE agents were injured at Delaney Hall. No one died. No one had a heart attack like Officer Fanone did. There were no strokes. There were no broken jaws, no broken necks. Nobody was forced out of police work like Sergeant Gonell was. Yet we've got members of Congress who would gladly jettison the speech and debate clause, which protects all of us in our work, the First Amendment and the Article I powers of Congress to score a few cheap political points at the expense of their own colleagues. In Trump world, violent insurrectionists and cop-beating extremists are heroes. They're martyrs. They're patriots. Members of Congress performing oversight functions are criminals and insurrectionists. And veteran criminal prosecutors of January 6 felons are fired, so Donald Trump can continue to pander to his private militia of pardoned rioters and insurrectionists and a reserve army of extremists who've proven themselves willing to stand back and stand by. Let me show you what a real assault on police officers looks like. If you'd roll the tape. Mr. Chairman, if this is an oversight hearing on ICE and ICE believes a real assault took place in New Jersey, where are they? Why are they not present today? The star of the show is absent, and that, my friends, is no oversight. I yield back. This hearing, if our motto is going to be finger pointings for losers, this hearing is for losers. Because all it is finger pointing at somebody who doesn't even have political power. This is an oversight hearing before the Oversight Subcommittee that's not doing any oversight on the government. Indeed, the Judiciary Committee has not yet conducted a single oversight meeting this Congress with a single government witness. Not one. They've not called Attorney General Bondi. They've not called FBI Director Patel. They haven't even called anybody to talk about George Soros from the government. They won't subject any of their government officials to any cross-examination by this panel. Now, I think this is an absurd waste of our time. Why are we not addressing urgent policy problems like the pervasive nationwide violation of due process and First Amendment rights by ICE and other federal agents who arrive now in unmarked cars, in plain clothes, without badges or arrest warrants, and then snatch people off the streets and send them to a torturer's prison in El Salvador? Do you think the United States House of Representatives Judiciary Committee should have an interest in defending due process? So my colleagues say, you're not for due process for guilty people, are you? Well, yeah, because we don't know if they're guilty until they've gotten due process. That's why due process are the two most beautiful words in the English language. It's what separates our rights and our freedoms from arbitrary state power. Why are we not addressing the threats to the security and safety of judges who are working to uphold the rule of law and now are subject not just to slander and defamation and signs all over Congress saying impeach this judge or that judge for standing up for the Constitution, now violent threats, not just to them, but to their family members? Why are we not addressing the mass firing of dozens of experienced crime-fighting federal prosecutors at the Department of Justice who've been fired en masse for the sole reason that they did their job and prosecuted police beaters, violent insurrectionists, and other rioters who attacked the Capitol on January 6, 2021 in order to overthrow a presidential election in the United States of America and attack our Constitution. Why are we not having a hearing about that? We could actually have a hearing. Here's something we could agree on, Mr. Chairman, on a bipartisan basis. Why don't we have a hearing on what the whole country's talking about right now? If you turn on TV and go on the internet, why don't we have a hearing about the continuing suppression and cover-up of the information in the Epstein files, about a child sex ring run by powerful people? The whole country, not just Republicans and MAGA, but liberal Democrats are in an uproar because President Trump, Attorney General Bondi, and their allies in the DOJ and FBI repeatedly claimed in public that the Epstein files have the names of power elite actors involved in human trafficking and sexual abuse of minors with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, and they promised to release all the information in the name of maximal transparency. You remember that? They said this would be the most transparent administration in the history of the United States. But now they're shouting nothing to see here, sweeping it all under the rug, steadfastly refusing to release the files despite broad bipartisan demand to release the Epstein files after everything they've said publicly. The Democratic members of this committee sent a letter today at 2 p.m. demanding that the president keep his word and release the files to the American people, and that Chairman Jordan call a bipartisan hearing where we can work together to get to the bottom of this. How about a hearing on that? Do any of my colleagues want to talk about that, or does everybody want to talk about George Soros? I'm curious to know which of my colleagues support our call for a bipartisan hearing on the Epstein files. So here we are at this utterly pointless hearing, spinning absurd, discredited conspiracy theories, again about George Soros. And again, I don't see a single claim of any criminality or illegality taking place. They don't like the guy's politics. I can find you 50 right-wing billionaires whose politics I don't like. So what? What an utter absurd waste of time this is. And it's an attempt to change the subject, obviously, from what America wants to talk about now, which is why, after promising for all of these years to release the Epstein files, will President Trump not release them? And we know they were friends, and we know they hung out, and we know there are all these pictures together. We know that Michael Wolff, Trump's biographer, said he saw photographs of Donald Trump and Epstein with minor-age girls. Well, where does that leave us? That doesn't look good if they then cover up all the information. Come clean and release the information, as the Republicans have repeatedly promised to do. So I look forward to hearing if there's any allegations of criminality or illegality. They should be turned over immediately to the Department of Justice today. Otherwise, this hearing, I'm afraid, Mr. Chairman, is for losers. It's about finger pointing at people who don't have any governmental power at all. It's old, recycled allegations, and we're not advancing the ball on anything. At the very least, the Judiciary committee should be demanding that the Epstein files be made public. That is a bipartisan agenda. At least I thought it was. And if something has changed, please let me know. But I thought that we were all for that together, and we should move on that today. Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Ranking Member, I thank you for your testimony and fundamentally disagree with you on everything. Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. And we're now going to introduce today's...
And please elaborate if you would, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to hear it.
I don't want to hold up the whole hearing, so it would take a considerable amount of time. It really would. And I want to give these fine gentlemen a chance from both sides of the aisle to place their testimony into the record. But we certainly could do that, and we may as we move along.
The framers, the founders, were most seriously afraid of a president who would act like a mad king, drunk on power, avaricious and determined to take all other powers unto himself. Madison, in the Federalist Papers, defined tyranny as the collapse of all powers, legislative, executive, and judicial, into one power. That was the very definition of it. Well, Section 2 names the president commander-in-chief, not of the country, not of the government, but of the Army and Navy and the militias in times of actual service. So what is the core job of the president? The core job of the president is to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. In other words, take the laws that have been passed by the House, by the Senate, signed into law by the president, and execute them, implement them. The president gets his powers only from two places, the Constitution says, and the Supreme Court has repeatedly reaffirmed. The president gets his power either directly from the Constitution or directly from a grant of Congress. And that's it. That's the whole meaning of the Supreme Court's decision in the Steele seizure case in 1952. There are no other powers that the president gets just by virtue of being the commander-in-chief or being the president. Well, Article 3 vests all judicial power in the Supreme Court and inferior courts to clarify legal rights and responsibilities in actual cases and controversies. As the court put it in 1803 in Marbury versus Madison, it's emphatically the province and the duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. No, Vice President Vance, it's not up to the president to define what the limits are on the power of the president. That's up to the Supreme Court. That's the whole meaning of judicial review in Marbury versus Madison. As Senator Durbin says, we must defend the independence and the integrity and the security of the judicial branch of government. And when 4 federal judges, 2 of them appointed by Democrats, 2 of them appointed by Republicans, struck down Donald Trump's executive order purporting to nullify birthright citizenship under the Constitution, a number of our colleagues in the House began to call for the impeachment of these judges without explaining what they had done wrong, without explaining any fallacy in their analysis, just calling for their impeachment. There have only been 15 federal judges impeached in all of American history by the Congress of the United States. And it's always for corruption or bribery or income tax evasion. It's for actually engaging in a crime, a high crime or misdemeanor, not because the Congress disagrees with their analysis, much less because Congress disagrees with their correct analysis of a legal problem. It's never happened before. The Bill of Rights was added to protect the rights and freedoms of the people against abuse by the government, whether it's a Congress passing laws that infringe on liberty, or a president making up laws, usurping congressional powers, or violating constitutional rights, or indeed states trespassing the rights of the people. Now, here's the amazing thing. The framers understood, like Lord Acton, that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so they arranged a constitutional system where power would be vertically divided, shared and distributed between the federal government and the states and localities, as well as horizontally distributed among the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of government. And the branches would check one another's abusive ambitions, and the people would exercise their freedoms of speech, press, assembly, petition of government, and so on to counterbalance the tyrannical propensities of government generally. We're in a dramatic constitutional confrontation today where every facet of the framers' design has been activated to try and save constitutional democracy and freedom. From the day he took office, Trump has tried to exercise powers like a king, trampling the rights of the people, usurping the powers of Congress, denouncing judges and threatening to defy the rulings of courts, and violating the legitimate authority of states and their elected officials. Last Saturday, June 14th, which was Flag Day and the president's birthday, he chose to stage a $45 million military parade in the streets of Washington. In response, at least 7 million anti-monarchical Americans assembled in over 2,000 protests in cities and towns across America for the unveiling of No King's Day, a magnificent demonstration of the inextinguishable resiliency of popular constitutional democracy in the face of dictatorial designs against the people. But the people marching in the streets from Philadelphia to Los Angeles, from the boundary waters of Minnesota to New Orleans, are not alone in this process. They reflect a powerful constitutional opposition in motion. Political leaders at the state level are fighting back in court along with their allies in Congress, and we are winning this fight every day in courtrooms across America. More than 328 lawsuits have been filed since Donald Trump, Stephen Miller, Pete Hegseth, Marco Rubio, and Elon Musk took office, and federal courts across the land have remarkably issued 197 preliminary injunctions or temporary restraining orders against this reign of lawlessness. The witnesses before us today, the attorney generals for the people of Massachusetts, Minnesota, New Jersey, and Illinois, are leaders in the fight for the Constitution and federal laws that have been abandoned by the president. And these chief state lawyers are winning significant battles in front of judges appointed by both Republican presidents and Democratic presidents. They are even winning in courts where judges preside who were appointed by President Trump himself. State attorneys general have brought at least 30 lawsuits against the new administration, successfully blocking many of its most reckless and lawless actions. They challenged Trump's efforts to nullify birthright citizenship and won injunctions to stop the order. They challenged Trump's funding freeze and won a court order forcing Trump to lift the freeze and deliver the funds to state and local programs. And when Trump didn't pay up, they went back to court to make him comply. They challenged DOJ's unconstitutional gathering of private data on millions of Americans, and just a few weeks ago won a ruling that will allow the suit to move forward. They sued when the administration tried to claw back billions of dollars in public health money and won an injunction against the rescission so that these funds would be delivered to the people of the states and localities. They sued to stop Trump's policies to dismantle voting rights and won a temporary injunction against major portions of his order requiring every citizen in America to prove their citizenship every time they go to vote. Trump's push against the rights of the people is losing in court, with judges striking down unconstitutional orders and issuing scathing rebukes to his lawlessness. Judge John Kuhnauer said of the Trump's birthright citizenship order, "I've been on the bench for over 4 decades. I can't remember another case where the question presented was as clear as this." He went on to ask, where were the lawyers when the decision was made to sign this executive order, and said that it boggled his mind that any member of the bar would contend the order was constitutional. This is a judge who was appointed by Ronald Reagan to the bench. Congressional Democrats have joined the state attorney generals in this fight. Although we're limited in what we can bring ourselves by virtue of very restrictive legal standing doctrines against members of Congress suing the president, we have filed detailed amicus briefs in support of the state attorney general suits, identifying our unique interests and unyielding determination to defend federal laws we have passed against executive usurpation. Of course, we have won some and we've lost some, and we would expect nothing less under the rule of law. But we will defend the rule of law. We will not be intimidated by Trump's threats and authoritarian tactics. Those of us who aspire to and attain to public office are nothing but the servants of the people, and the people are sovereign, and we all serve in the interest of the people. To every state AG who is with us today, and to those who are not here but are in this battle also for the rule of law, I say on behalf of all of our colleagues, it's an honor to be in this fight with you. Congressional Democrats are proud to stand with you in this fight to protect our Constitution, its values, and the rights of our people. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The economy today is shrinking. The stock market is sinking. Inflation is soaring. $7 trillion in American retirements and wealth has been destroyed. You've plunged us with your imbecilic tariffs into a trade war with the whole world, except, of course, for your bosom buddies in Russia. So now, only 100 days in, with 100 unforced policy blunders, you're the most unpopular president at this point in your presidency in more than 80 years. Barack Obama stood at 69% in the polls. Ronald Reagan was at 73% in the polls. Truman was 87%, and Franklin D. Roosevelt, 68%. But Donald Trump is at 39%. The lowest 100-day approval rating since polling began. He controlled the agenda for 100 days. He controlled the House, he controlled the Senate, he's got everything going for him, and his numbers are in the gutter. So now he reaches back into the authoritarian playbook. Go back and please the wealthiest people and corporations in the country. House Republicans want to cut hundreds of billions of dollars from Medicaid, food assistance for mothers and children, veterans benefits, Meals on Wheels, Head Start, any programs that help actual people, all in order to pay for another gargantuan tax break for the president's billionaire benefactors. And here in the Judiciary Committee, Our good friends want to help Donald Trump use his power in violation of the Constitution that we are all sworn to uphold and defend against enemies, foreign and domestic. Every day, the administration uses immigration enforcement as a template to erode constitutional rights and liberties. They round up people in the street and disappear them to the torture prison of a foreign dictator without 1 minute of due process, sweeping up completely innocent people who have no criminal record and no criminal charges, in the midst of other people who may have criminal records and criminal charges and should stand prosecution for them if they do have charges against them. They're stripping college and graduate students at American universities of their visas for writing op-eds that the administration disagrees with. They invoke emergency wartime powers like the Alien Enemies Act to fight a military invasion at the border while telling us that the border has never been safer than it is right now. My colleagues say all these measures are necessary to deport gang members, violent criminals, the worst of the worst. But they're not targeting the worst of the worst. They're arresting judges now. They're using federal agents to round up law-abiding members of the community with no criminal records, parents of American children, husbands and wives of American spouses, people who've not been shown to pose any public safety threat at all. They're breaking into cars to arrest mothers as their children's watch in terror. They're arresting people who are coming in for their citizenship interviews. They're staking out people's homes and trolling through IRS taxpayer data in search of tax-paying people to deport. Look, we know how to remove people from the country who should not be here. President Biden's administration did that. We know how to do it legally, consistent with the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. But the Trump administration has discarded the rule of law. If he can sweep non-citizens off the street and fly them to a torturer's prison in El Salvador with no due process, he can do it to citizens too. Because if there's no due process, if there's no fair hearing, you've got no opportunity to object. And indeed, several American citizen children, including one with cancer, were flown to Honduras last week with no due process, as a Trump-appointed judge in Louisiana found. Now the courts have issued more than 95 preliminary injunctions and temporary restraining orders against this reign of lawlessness. But Republicans want to enable President Trump to keep going. This Judiciary Committee bill seeks to strip the courts of their power to hold an administration in contempt when the president violates explicit judicial court orders. And it doesn't stop there. While they try to defund the courts, they're forking over an astonishing $81 billion to the administration for more of these immigration roundups. The legislation includes a whopping $45 billion for ICE on top of its annual budget of $9 billion for family and adult detention centers alone. This bill is a blank check to the administration to do more of what we've already seen. And to make matters worse, as they race to spend more than $81 additional billion on this, Trump's own DOJ is terminating hundreds of millions of dollars in existing grants. They're cutting funding for county, state, and local law enforcement. They're cutting funding for opioid addiction treatment programs. They're cutting funding for crime prevention, and they're cutting funding for victims of rape, sexual assault, and violent crimes. The grants being cut support local police in solving and preventing crime. They help the survivors of abuse and assault navigate the legal system, and yet they're being wiped out by the Department of Justice. They're also trying to handcuff the agencies that work to make sure our food and drugs are safe and our air and water are clean. The REINS Act is buried in here. It would prevent the government from enforcing our civil rights, protecting workplace safety, and guarding against misconduct by banks. It would require both houses of Congress and the president to approve every major rule from our agencies to take effect, virtually guaranteeing no effective regulatory action on any subject. They've also tucked the Midnight Rules Relief Act in here, which would allow Republicans to bundle hundreds of regulations all together into a single package and vote them down on a single jumbo resolution, which would be used to hide the most destructive deregulatory votes among dozens of others, completely burying it in darkness. Look, this version of an authoritarian America is not what the American people want. Please take note. This is why Donald Trump's polling numbers are in the gutter and an historic low. This is not what the American people are looking for. We urge our colleagues to walk back from the brink here, to support many amendments we plan to offer today that will save us money, that will actually address the real problems of the country, and that will protect the constitutional rights and freedoms that we cherish so much in America. This is a test. Are we going to stand up for the majority of the American people, for our Constitution and our Bill of Rights and the freedoms we fought for, or are we going to stand with a president who wants to throw it all away? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.